Good afternoon. We'll get started in just a moment. Good afternoon and welcome to this webinar, Preliminary Study Results on the Safety of Singing. I'm Allen Henderson. I'm Executive Director of NATS. I want to thank my cohorts from our partner organizations, Tim Sharp from ACDA, Marty Monson from the Barbershop Harmony Society, Catherine Dehoney from Course America, and Lucinda Halstead from the Performing Arts Medicine Association. We're grateful to partner together during this time to bring relevant data and conversation around important topics in our field. I'm happy to be joined today by Olivia Lerwick, Dr. Jelena Srebric from the University of Maryland, and Dr. Lucinda Halstead, President of the Performing Arts Medicine Association. And we're going to have a conversation. We're going to address as many questions as we can from our listeners. And we're also hoping to have a good bit of discussion around a variety of topics. But before we get to that, I want us to have a conversation with Olivia for a moment. And Olivia was one of the singers who was in the study and sang. And so, Olivia, I want to ask you a few questions about your experience so that we can all see exactly what you went through as a singer whose singing was measured as a part of the study. So tell us a little bit about your experience and what the room was like and how the setup was.
Sure. Thank you so much for inviting me. And hopefully, what I can say will be helpful. The setup was in quite a small room. So the first time that I did it, this was just for like the visual viewing of the aerosols with the camera. So they didn't do like the ventilation that I did the second time when they used the machines to detect the different particles that I was emitting, I guess, when I sang. So as it said on that graph, that was just showing I did some scales for warm up and different dynamics. I think it was like F major and D major, so it wasn't anything that was too rangy. And then I had that hymn that I sang that I think also only went up to about an F. And then the Rent excerpt from The Seasons of Love. So That I think the biggest thing that surprised me a little bit was that I didn't bring in anything that had like a very large range as far as like singing more high and loud to see how much more that might expel, because they did say that me singing at like a forte or like higher in my range did expel quite a bit more than lower in my range. But yeah, it was a small room with the particles. The second time when I came back and sang, I would sing and then I would turn these fans on again to clear the room, but I never opened the door again. So I was pretty much sealed off in there for about an hour, hour and a half. And then it was a little bit strange because I had to bend down and sing into the tube that was catching the particles. So my posture felt a little bit strange as far as any of that technique went with that. But other than that, that was pretty much the process, just a lot of repetition, nothing too rangy, a small room, and those ventilation, the way that they would clear it out between each take.
Great. And you're a graduate student at the University of Colorado Boulder,
Yeah.
right? You sang some with a mask and some without a mask, right? So what kind of mask did you wear when you sang?
It was just a disposable mask that I brought. They didn't specify any particular kind, so yeah.
So it's just the mask you were wearing and using, basically.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, great. Um, so you were kind of used to that mask, so it wasn't kind of an awkward experience from that standpoint.
Right. I mean, I had never tried to sing in it, so when I was inhaling, it felt very strange to have it suddenly, I couldn't inhale as much air as I wanted. Oh, I did forget to mention, they put some almost opaque pantyhose over like a loop to kind of use as like a screen at one point. And that seemed to be just as effective as the mask as well. They were just looking to see if fabrics from farther away would also have proved to have the same effect as the mask.
Mhm. Great. So, yeah, if we can bring Jelena on now, and if we do look at uh, that slide again, then we can there we go. Then we can see exactly kind of what Olivia went through in the time that she was in the room. So we can see the scales, we can see the warm-up, we see where she was singing the hymn. Jelena, you want to talk to us a little bit about this graph?
Sure, I can. First, I would like to mention that it's so wonderful to hear Olivia describe the experiment, because we can definitely improve at least the positioning of instruments. But we could also describe a little bit in more details to the participants what different aspects maybe of the experiment are doing, and also your suggestion of going to higher range to see what are the absolute limits. That's also very interesting thing that I will bring to our team meeting on Thursday. So thank you for that. I don't know if you guys already discussed, but I haven't heard this before. When it comes to background, so it's very important that that chamber is sealed off so we can make a contribution to specifically to your singing or anybody's singing. So sorry for the claustrophobic experience, but in the actual environment, if you are just singing, it would be very difficult to distinguish whether that came from computer or other devices that are known to release particles. So when you're sealed off and this filter goes on in the background in between the events, that basically clears the air for the lack of better description. And then as you're singing, the reason why you're leaning into the instrument or towards the instrument to find the highest point or highest amount of particles that expels through the singing. And as you can see, when you go from scales to singing a pop song or hymn, you basically double the amount of the particles in the air. So in some respect, you can imagine that if you happen to have COVID, that basically doubles the risk compared to the baseline, am I right? For just warming up or singing scales. And I can imagine that you can, based on your own recollection, you can do even much higher probably concentrations than what we measured only here. So the idea with this particular experiment is really to show how highly effective the masks are, even though they are quite uncomfortable. So we do need better solutions with the masks, am I right? So that especially for performers, singers, and even that we call this performers because we put in that category even teachers or anybody else who has to project their voice or in a theater to deliver content. And the discussion of pantyhoses became quite interesting because as Lucinda will discuss about masks and fits or other guests as I understood, one quick way that has been proven so far to create the perfect mask fit is basically kind of using your own regular disposable surgical mask that is apparently having pretty good properties of the material for capturing particles, but the issues become when you have leaks around the mask. And again, I don't want to discuss in more details that here right now, but basically one way to improve the fit was to basically put pantyhose and tie over your existing mask. And in that particular study, the performance of this combo was comparable to the best masks in the market, the ones that are used in the hospitals, also known as N95. So there is possible to engage in more safe performances, at least for this foreseeable period before we have other forms or solutions by wearing masks. And this experiment clearly shows how effective that approach is. Yeah.
Yeah, I was surprised actually to see how effective, I mean, of course we know that we need to wear a mask, but to see how effective the masks were in singing and bringing down the particles was very pleasing to me, but also, I think even better than what I expected it would be. So Olivia, when you were in the room, so you sang with your mask and then they used the pantyhose while you were singing through the mask? Or was that separate?
It was separate.
Okay.
And I think I saw a question that asked how far or how close it was. I held it quite close to my mouth, both with the machine, the instrument that was counting the particles, and when I did the visualization of the aerosol. Yeah.
Great. So I think one of the things that, Jelena, I think that we want to also ask about is about they also did part of it with a HEPA filter. So what exactly were we using there? Olivia, is that something you turned on while you were doing it in the room, or is that something that ran separately?
I don't know specifically. As far as the filter, the only thing that I did, at least for the aerosol part of the test, when it was counting that, there were 2 fans that might have been HEPA filters that I would turn on and turn off every time I would sing, and then they would be used to clear the room. But I can't I don't know if they were specifically those filters or not.
Great.
I was not in the room, but I am almost positive. Again, I was not in that particular room because we are across the country. I haven't seen the images of the setup, but I know that they use portable HEPA filtration, so that's the thing. So the idea is that we were kind of looking for some quick solutions that do not restrict your breathing with a mask. So if HEPA filter could work in the background and prevent transmission, that was going to be considered as a really nice solution. But it's not nearly as effective as singing with a mask. And I remember I saw a pop-up with a question as related to humming versus singing. And again, I just took a note. We did not do tests with humming, but there is something that I would like to bring to everybody's attention. So when we are, as soon as we are breathing, and if we do have COVID, we are expelling the particles. Doesn't matter whether it's through our nose or our mouth, something is coming out. With respect whether humming is more safe than singing, what it does change there is that the amount of expelled particles or spray-borne, how we call them, can be significantly reduced, but still mask is required because you still are expelling particles just at a smaller rate.
Right. And what exactly, Olivia, what exactly kinds of warm-ups did you do in there? Do you remember?
Yeah, they had two, and so they were originally written with different dynamics and accents and things, but the researchers determined that they thought it would be just simpler if I just did one piano like a few times and then doing it just at forte a couple times. They did have vowels and consonants. So the plosive consonants, I watched a couple of the videos. You just see so much more spray out with those. I can't speak to this for sure. It seemed like the vowels were all pretty even, but the differences in consonants could make quite a big difference. So.
Great. Good. Well, great. I hope that provides our audience and our listeners with a little bit of perspective from the singer standpoint of someone actually going into the chamber and doing that, so you can see what some of these singers are doing to help us gather data and help us provide researchers the data they need to give us the direction we need to do our jobs well in these times. So I really appreciate your contributions, Olivia, to this, and I'm sure we may be seeing or hearing you again as they do more testing and as things move down the road in this research project. So Jelena, talk to us a little bit about this slide, which was kind of the summary slide. And of course, the singers are the one at the far right on everyone's screen.
Again, I just have to mention that the previous data set and this data set has been collected by my colleagues at UC Boulder. We will be replicated the same experiment here at University of Maryland. So just want to give credits because they really revved up this study so quickly on their side while our administration was bogged down into the administrative processes. So they did, so in this particular setup here, music instruments were there. We were basically testing different music instruments with and without bell covers. So as you can see, we were pleasantly surprised when it come to the flute. So the flute experiment was the first one, or among the first ones, because everybody was really afraid that flute would expel a lot of particles. However, that was not the case. And then you can see that basically oboe and French horn is something that will be tested in our lab as well. First, the instruments such a flute or saxophone. We will not replicate those experiments because we are comfortable with the results, and there were no interventions that we could implement to make it better. And again, bell covers were also made out of some kind of pantyhose materials. So I think when it comes to this particular cheap, quick solutions, pantyhoses are saving us for now. It is true because we cannot scale up and deliver all of the type of HEPA filters that we need out in the field. So we are honestly impressed with the performance. So that's why, Olivia, you have seen them try to stretch things and see if they can capture it in the air while you were singing. So people are out of need trying to find solutions. So you can see that oboe, clarinet, saxophone, trumpet. I'm not sure what happened with the trumpet. Again, I wish my colleagues were here, but you can see that with the control method mask, so no control, this darker bar means there was no implementation on any way of reducing the particle emissions. And then you would have the three other methods controlling the, with the bell covers was the one that was in a green. So the dark color, yes, is the no control. Then the next teal color, I think, is using control with the mask. And then mask, meaning the ones that were having, the musicians had over their face and had a slit. And then with the bell covers. And I think the last one was not repeated in all of the instruments. I'm not so sure for the last control method. I apologize for that. But basically the idea is that using the masks with the slits and bell covers kind of produce, as you could imagine, the best reduction in amount of particles that different instruments were releasing. And you can also see the same thing happens with the singers, or in this case with Olivia, the most effective method use the cover or basically mask.
And I think it was important for us to note also the theater, which is the next to the last one, just the dramatic speaking, which many of us also use in our work, is relevant for some of the things that we're doing as well. So we want to notice that the effect is similar in using a mask.
I would also like to mention that when it comes to the theater, I had a little bit of conversations earlier today, or to marching bands. We are not really advising people to be moving on stage or moving in the marching band. And basically, unfortunately, for, again, foreseeable future, sure, some movements in place, but really not major movements on a stage or in the field. Because what can happen in that situation is that you unintentionally go through each other clouds. We do want to minimize that mixing among different participants.
Great. Now let's talk a little bit about some of your work with your colleague in kind of creating some of these kind of modeling experiments that you've been working on to help us also estimate what kinds of safe ways of performing might happen.
So while we were waiting for the administration to finish their job, we thought, what could we make as a contribution, because we knew that this opening of the or the upcoming school year was really weighing on everybody, as it still probably is. We just tried to alleviate some concerns or give some best advice to the current state of the art and knowledge about this transmission. What we have done is basically we take what we measured or what our colleagues measure in the environment, and then use a simulation domain with basically mathematical equations to represent where those particles go in the space. And that technology is pretty robust. It comes from, you probably maybe have seen something about rockets or engines, but we basically deploy the same high-end technology to trace your jets from singing inside of a space. So we were asked a lot of questions about indoor singing or playing music, and outdoor as well. So the questions that we received from forums and discussions like this is basically what informed each of the next steps when we did our investigation. So the questions kept on coming up about wearing masks, about doing the practices outside in the field with basically tents, or inside in the rooms, and what would be the time that is safe for somebody to stay in those spaces before the risk level increases. And again, we make recommendations. So that's what we have done here. If we move the slides. And we, in this particular case, put a little person underneath canopy, and then also put a person in a small room like the one that Olivia was singing in, and has a typical supply at the ceiling and exhaust at the ceiling. All our classrooms or recital halls look like that, or most of them. If they don't, that's unusual. And also this person in the field, under that tiny person under that canopy, has a wind blowing kind of left to right, and at a speed that is roughly 0.4, 0.5 miles per hour at the breathing level, and this 2.2 miles per hour, it's at the standard elevation of 30 feet. And we also model the mask with a perfect fit, because when we discussed what can we do within those 2 weeks, we couldn't model mask with the imperfect fit, because there are so many different imperfect fits. So we decided to start where we could all agree upon. So let's move on. Again, guys, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate. And this is a cross section at horizontal cross section of our results at the nose level, so that you kind of breathing plane. And we kind of have shown that in an outdoor environment without a mask, after 60 minutes, you are within this, wind is not very fast here, but if you stay apart within 6 feet, sorry, this horizontal axis here are meters. I apologize for that. So this is like a 5 feet here. So if you stay within 6 feet and do not march around, you do not expose each other's to your own breath particles to any high concentration level. Sure, you can get whiff here and there, but there is nothing sustained. When it comes to being underneath the canopy, because a lot of people were worried about sun and exposure to sun, we also have shown that you can be even a little bit closer as long as you are wearing a mask. So some form of practices under a canopy, outside in a light breeze, is not highly risky event as long as you're wearing a mask.
Great.
And again, we would not ever advocate for you to stay there longer than half an hour maybe in the outdoor case, you can stretch it to 45 minutes. And then it's time for everybody to kind of disperse and let the area kind of clear out. If we move on to the next slide. Here we have an indoor environment, and in the indoor environment, we looked at the risk now, again, after 10, 30, and 60 minutes. And the bottom one is, sorry, I apologize, I know I always tell my students never to do this, but guess what? I'm worse than them. What we have done is that, again, we looked again at the breathing plane, and if you don't have a mask after 60 minutes, even after 30, you have to be very careful on which side you approach, or you have seen many recommendations not to face the person that is singing or talking to you. So you can see why, because in front of the person is much more risky than behind the person. So we then basically have found that if you have a mask, again, with a perfect fit, it looks pretty neat beyond your personal space. But we know pretty well that a perfect fit is not possible in realistic conditions. And therefore, we kind of shorten the time. Am I right? Instead of giving you, as you will from Lucinda guest, nice drills on how to perfectly fit, we assume that life is messy and that it's better that we shorten the time than to take full responsibility for a mask fit.
I see. So it seems like the results show that no matter what other factors we might have available to us, a HEPA filter, any kind of barrier or whatever, and distance, it's still essential for us to wear a mask and to have a mask.
Yes, I couldn't agree more with that. And that's one of the findings that is really important to highlight. Thank you, Allen.
They talked a good bit about distance the other day in the webinar and the results as well. And it seems like the results of this study so far and the kind of support the CDC guidance of 6 foot, other than, although we're talking about singing today, one thing that did come out was using having more space for trombones in particular.
And the bell covers should still be used, and the trombone just was the case that the jet is so strong that overpowers this initial recommendation. I would also caution everybody, even for the outdoor environment, that I could imagine a situation where 6 feet is not sufficient, and again, that is probably intuitive. You could imagine very strong wind, very persistent wind that is not like shifting direction. In that case, you certainly should not be standing behind a person in front of you, even if it's a 6 feet distance. That's the time to call off the practice. But we did not implement the recommendation here because we physically did not get a chance yet to put it in a recommendation. What is the wind velocity roughly, right? When you need to abandon the practice in outdoor environment.
When we were talking about theater a minute ago, you advised us not to have much movement while singing or playing or acting. I think you're saying that's just in general. Somebody asked, particularly their direct-to-show choir, for instance, which obviously involves a lot of choreography usually, and some of those things. So you would say to that, stay minimal with that kind of movement?
Correct. So again, I think I spoke earlier to somebody, I mean, another music program director, and we had a very nice conversation. We are kind of trying to find a way to release the creative valves so people are not really um, totally abandoning their love for music and practice that is absolutely necessary. And then the piece that is particularly enjoyable, engaging your colleagues in a performance. So we are trying to find an angle where until better systems for protection, either engineered or a vaccine, are available to us, to find a way where we can engage in the performance. It's still limited, I understand, and but I do think it's better than nothing, and it's much better doing it as if nothing is happening. So we want all of our performers to do great, but to be safe until for the foreseeable months or whatever time period is necessary.
What kind of implications do you think some of this has for directors who, may stand at some distance in front of a group and conduct?
So I think our directors and even teachers are actually at the riskiest position. So that's the group that we are now targeting for additional help. So that graph with the HEPA filters have shown total background reduction. It was not the same as if you did not have a HEPA filter, so it reduced the risk. So what we are going to, and not just we, other people are trying, my colleagues in different institutions are trying to help best they can, is to try to create a safe zone for directors and teachers. So if you're a director, please hold tight for a minute. But basically, we are trying to create or advise the location of HEPA filtration, local HEPA filtration, and how much that could reduce the risk for a conductor or a teacher. So some creation of a safe zone, additional assisted air cleaning for directors and for teachers, absolutely necessary.
Mm-hmm. I know they made some recommendations about, you all made some recommendations about time.
Yes.
Of course, this significantly impacts a whole host of things, whether we're in classroom teaching, rehearsals, or whether we have independent church choirs or professional choirs, barbershop groups, all those kind of things. Describe to us a little bit about the importance of limiting our rehearsal time.
So you can imagine the longer, I sometimes compare the room, because these particles tend to be invisible. We are putting, my team is putting out visualization, like a video, so that people can see, so they're not even, so you're less afraid, you know what you're facing, and it's not anymore that ambiguous. These things are kind of floating around. And the idea is that the longer you are staying there, if somebody is breathing the viral particles, the greater concentration, and that accumulates in the room, and the risk increases as the time goes by. So you definitely want to limit your time, not just in your rehearsal and your music performances. You also would like to practice this in your other life situations. If you don't have to be somewhere more than 10 minutes, please don't be more there than 10 minutes. And I foresee that for this rehearsal time and indoor activities, the most challenging thing will be moving in and out your students and performers, because that's also critical operation, and it should be organized, socially distant, masked, and fast. Hallways should not be used for congregation or anything like that. also for the outdoor performances play, you should cease for some time and disperse the group so that the area gets ventilated by the wind itself. So these are all very, very important things to keep in mind when implementing these recommendations, because it's one thing to make a recommendation. It's totally different thing once you are really in the field and trying to do this yourself and coordinate. So it's very important that you kind of have a plan, maybe even write out a plan. So that's what we are doing in my organization. And then even act out the plan or imagine acting out the plan. So all of this really helps relieve the stress and kind of also relieve the stress of your performers, or the ones that don't even care about, make them aware how important it is to comply and help everybody organize rehearsals so that it's safe for everybody who shows up.
Mm-hmm. Just a couple of questions that were in the feed. I can answer a couple of those. One said, is the study of recorder playing being done in the future? And they did mention that last week, that they are going to be doing some testing of recorders. And so those of you, especially music ed folks who teach recorder in your elementary classes, can be expecting some data on that. And somebody says, if the outdoor max time is 30 or 45 minutes per location, can you move to a different location? And I'm assuming that's, of course, yes. You know, if you have multiple locations and you want to have a longer rehearsal, you rehearse 30 minutes, and then this location, you move down the field or wherever, you know, and you can continue rehearsal. Okay, good. We've talked a little bit about you know, our outdoor, our airflow outdoor. We talked about indoor. We've not talked a lot about so much. It's specifically about filtration. We have some resources later. We'll mention to people that they can go to that will help recommend those things, or at least the specs of what they need for room sizes. You want to talk to us anything a little bit about HEPA filtration or those kinds of things, and what we should be, what are the big considerations we should have?
Sure. I see some questions that are flashing up about some HVAC and things like that. So please, if you have something specific, let me know. But in principle, if you are to use any tent or basically awning or something like that to protect your performance from direct sun, please make sure that all sides are open. So those tents that are fully enclosed are no different than being indoors and would require an HVAC system for ventilation, which exists, but basically it's the same as if you are in an indoor space. The tent that has just overhead cover performs similarly to indoor spaces that are very well ventilated. So it's not the same if you have a little cover or you are in a totally open field. So keep that in mind. The more things you add to block the wind, the less ventilation locally you have there. When it comes to air filtration, using HEPA filters or devices with HEPA filters inside, and you should always look for clean air delivery rate, and the devices should be AHAM certified. So there is a lot of products in the market where people are trying to profit off our rightful fears. Please make sure that devices are have this clean air delivery rate, and that they are certified, so that you're buying an actual air cleaning device. So I will, the room size, your HEPA filter, your device will give you an idea, or they would give you some simple equation or some square footage that that filter can cover. That would depend on the capacity of the fan and the filter that you purchase. It's very important, whatever you purchase and whatever you use, to follow the instructions for replacing those filters, because one of the biggest faux pas of HVAC is that you would get a nice device, you would run it and so on, but then you forget to change a filter, and that basically defeats the purpose. So that's something that I would advocate for. We have here the recommendations that we provided is for standard HVAC systems that are having roughly 3 air changes per hour. So somebody asked, what is that? And the air change means how many times from your vents air comes in and completely replaces the air that already is within a room. It's a dynamic process, am I right? It's continuously happening. New air is pushing the old one, but 3 air change means that every 20 minutes, the room air gets completely replaced. So people ask often about open windows. Yes, open windows do help. But if it's too hot and humid, people don't open the windows. If it's too cold, people do not open windows. So I would use open windows not as my major source of ventilation, but as a mitigation strategy. Again, if you don't have an HVAC system in place, it's possible to put some fan in the window to assist the air being brought into the space. So always bring external air into the room, because somebody asked me to kind of exhaust the air from the room. In that case, the new air would come from the hallway, and basically, again, it's not really such a great idea to do that. So if you are to open the windows or use some fans to assist air coming into your classroom, I understand if that's the only solution you have. Please turn the fan to bring the air into the room. And if you have another window, maybe you can open it for the exhaust of the air. So air has to leave somewhere. And it always goes the least resistance route. Air doesn't want to listen. It just does what it does.
We would, we've seen pictures, and other people recommend or talk about rehearsing in parking garages. Would you kind of equate that with rehearsing in a tent, or is that different?
I think that's a creative idea. I am not certain that I think that would be worse than Canopy in the field because it still has more obstructions, and you still depend on a vent for to bring the air there. So I would equate that to a room with open window and no ventilation. So I definitely would not be a huge fan of that one.
And it seems to me you're describing below ground versus, but what about above ground floor? Same.
Same. It's a lot of obstructions there, and depends on what kind of ventilation. If it's above ground, you don't have required any ventilation. So it is like you have always open window, but something needs to push the air through that open window or through that garage. And because the garage is open on all sides, maybe, but again, my preference would be if you have a canopy or something like that, or maybe on a higher floors of that garage or close to the top, anywhere where you feel a breeze would be better than in some area where the air is not moving.
Yeah, great. I think that another thing we might talk about, we've had several questions about churches, and one is involving one person asked, it would seem that any congregational singing at all followed by a short sermon would be dangerous. Am I wrong? Someone says.
I think that I don't think that the statement is wrong, because you include there the movement of people around, am I right? And you have, again, with some masks and ventilation and maybe some local HEPA filtration to protect, again, the priest or again person giving the sermon would be probably the way to go, but I would consider that to be high risk event.
Great.
I think somebody also asked about opening windows while using HEPA filters in the space. I would say open windows are fantastic as long as they're bringing the air in, am I right? So opening windows would never hurt. There is no circumstance. I know that HEPA filtration is meant to clean the air, but we need to think about what we are trying to clean it and where the source is. So the source of COVID is coming from other people indoors. If you open the window, unless you have a group, practicing in front of your window, as long as your window is facing, not facing other people outside of your window, it's a very good idea to open the window.
Great. Well, let's talk a little bit about masks and some of the things. I know Lucinda's put together a few slides just to give us some overviews about some of the things that are coming relative to vaccines and drug treatments. But then we're going to get into talking a lot about masks with both Jelena and Lucinda. So Lucinda?
Thank you, Alan. Just to kind of, bring us back to where we were in May and where we are now, it's amazing the speed at which people are trying to develop things so that we can eventually and fairly rapidly get back to the kinds of performances, as you see in this picture, at the pre-COVID levels, where there isn't that, it may be that we'll never ever get there, but at least we'll get much closer to where people can be closer together in more of the traditional performance settings. And the things that really have been implemented are widespread testing and contact screening. It's, here to the best of our ability. And the vaccination development, as most people are aware, the CDC and the has this, and the research community has really developed something that they call Operation Warp Speed. And the vaccination development has really gone at just a stunning pace. Things that usually take years have been done in a matter of months. Drug treatments for infected individuals, and then mitigation strategies. So in terms of vaccination, we have 3 vaccines that are now fast-tracked and funded by the US government. The Moderna's mRNA vaccine, the University of Oxford and AstraZeneca's, it's also an mRNA vaccine, which is completing its phase 2 trial and getting ready for their phase 3 trial. And the same thing with the Pfizer and BioNTech's vaccine is finishing its phase 2 trial. All of these preliminary trials have been highly successful, and successful enough that the US government is funding them, and actually definitely the Moderna. I'm not sure about the other 2. The vaccines are already in pre-production for commercial distribution. The other thing that we didn't have, so that we didn't have that in May. The other thing we didn't have in May were treatments for those infected, and we still don't have a lot. We don't have anything that would be the equivalent of Tamiflu for influenza, where it's an outpatient preventative thing. But we do have 2 things remdesivir and dexamethasone, which have been critically important in patients who are critically ill with lung infections, who are on ventilators, and improving survival. So we're making slow progress there. The last thing, which is we're going to spend a little bit more time on, is the mitigations. And I think a little bit later, Alan, you're going to be touching on the risk assessment tools and people's comfort about entering into all of these different activities, which is critical. One of the things that we had mentioned in May is that, you know, everybody has to agree when they walk in the room that this is what's going to happen, and that, you know, that they're going to participate in this event, and that, you know, right now there may be a small amount of risk. If everybody's, you know, totally healthy, then there's not. But as we all know, sometimes it's hard to know when people are infected. So the mitigation strategies that we all know are social distancing. We've just been talking about performance space, and we've also been talking about masks. And I volunteered to do a little show and tell. This was from the coalition webinar on Thursday about how you put on your mask and what it looks like. It needs to be over your mouth and nose. It needs to fit snugly under your chin and against the sides of your face. And the biggest problem for singers is making sure you can breathe easily, because depending on the mask that you have, you may or may not be able to breathe easily. And so you can also see that what we usually see walking down the street is a lot of creative mask wearing, which doesn't really help. And I get it, because I wear masks all the time now, that it's really hard to keep your nose and your mouth covered. You know, being a surgeon, you get used to it. So that's kind of where, you know, where I come from. It's a little bit more, but still challenging. So poor mask fit, Jelena's already talked about that. You know, you have gaps on the side, maybe your nose isn't completely covered, and I'll demonstrate that. It's very loose, and better fitting masks kind of fit more tightly. They were talking about, James Weaver was talking about more the surgical mask with the ties that go around the head. And we can talk about some things that can mitigate the ear loop masks. And then you have a well-fitted mask, such as the N95 mask, which I will also show you, and some of the pros and cons of each of these masks. So the next, yeah. So, you know, the purpose of these masks is to limit droplet and aerosol spread. And we've already covered the fact that indoor singing should be, you know, limited to 30 minutes because of the heterogeneity we have of mask type and fit right at the moment. This is an evolving thing. So if you have the next slide. So the next thing that we're going to talk about is, everybody talks about N95 masks. And, you know, this is my N95 mask. I have been fit tested for this, which means that I go, when I was given these masks, they put a big hood on me and then put an aerosol in there that would make you have a bitter taste in your mouth, which was supposedly not subtle. But my mask fit perfectly, so I never experienced it. So these, in order to get them on, so when I breathe in, you can see that it comes against my mouth. And this is more of a duckbill, so it's not right up against my lips. But I work in these all day long, and when I am teaching, you can see that it kind of sinks around there. And when I start talking to people in a regular conversation like this, after about 10 or 15 minutes, I get very short of breath. Why? Because I'm just recirculating what's in my mask. And studies have shown that as you continue to wear these, if you wear it for about an hour, your blood oxygenation drops some and your blood CO2 goes up. And so I get a little breathless, and sometimes I have to kind of stop and just kind of sit there and catch my breath a little bit, because it becomes very, very difficult. And I can't imagine trying to sing in something that is quite like this, because you're not getting any fresh air in there. You know, to be able to do a performance in something like this, or as an opera singer, to be able to really open your mouth would be pretty challenging for a fit. It's actually pretty funny. But you can see that on the side here, these straps come to pull everything close against your face so that there is no space around that mask. And when I take it off, I always have a little crease around here. And that's because it's fit exactly the way it should be. And, you know, for surgery, for dealing with patients, for doing, you know, laryngeal exams on my patients in the office, I wear this. I wear, you know, eye shields, and I wear some protection. I have a veil on my eye shield so that, you know, I have a second layer of protection when I'm doing my procedures. So this is what the N95 looks like. I'm getting a little breathless right now. And so, you know, I would say we need to find a mask that has all of these properties, but figure out a way to let the singer breathe. I'm going to take this off. Whew. So the second one is a surgical mask. Now, this surgical mask is a high filtration mask because we use it for laser surgery. So it actually filters very small particles around the area of 5 microns. Again, just like your N95, this mask, because you have independent straps on it, you can get it so that it fits very tightly to your face. So this is a mask I use during laser surgery, as long as I'm not using it on diseases that are infected, you know, that have infection, like viral infections like the human papillomavirus. So I can use this if we're just doing scar tissue and some other kinds of things. But again, trying to sing with this, as Olivia was saying, you have this, and we're going to go down to some of the singer's masks and other masks that have nose and, you know, bridges across this way and this way, that would be a little bit better. But then we can talk a little bit about that challenge there. But you can see that I'm protected from any kind of laser plume that you would have. And again, this is sort of the thing that James Weaver was talking about, that it's very tightly fitting, and actually it's really pretty comfortable. So I will just say one thing about the N95 mask with the little exhale valve in there. Those really aren't good because, as I'm sure Jelena would say, you know, it opens up, so it's going to protect you. These are meant to protect people who are working in construction from dust. And so they don't breathe in anything, but everything that they have, their exhalation goes right out in unimpeded into the atmosphere. So that would not be a good mask for a singer, because it would almost be the equivalent of wearing not a very good mask at all. So the cotton masks are very actually interesting, because there's been lots of studies on, you know, what kinds of things can minimize particles, and the creativeness that people have had on these masks with the different kinds of fabrics. There's this study that I just referenced there, and it's just one of many, showing that there's different kinds of materials. The thicker and denser the material for cotton, for example, they were talking about the quilting, batting kind of material being very effective. They actually were using silk for its electrostatic properties. to corral the aerosols and to, maybe, and so, I would think that the silk and the pantyhose would be very, very similar. I adore the idea of the pantyhose. I think that that's just fantastic. So the tighter the weave, the smaller the particles that will be uptaken. And this little blue mask in the corner is pretty much what they were using, something very similar. And I think that was very similar to the mask Olivia was using in the study. And so one of the things in the first study, when you were looking at her, because of the gaps, you could see the aerosol coming up around her nose, and they were going to look at how it came off the side. So here's one of those masks, and it has the ear loops on it. Now let me just get my ear back in there. Okay, so, and you can see it's got some gaps here. It's got some, even with the little nose piece, we've got some gap up here and definitely gaps here. So, you can see that it doesn't, if I take a big deep breath in, nothing happens to the mask. It's because there's just too much air around it. It's loose down here, it's loose down here. Now, one of the things that people who have, now that everybody has to in the healthcare situation and in many office situations, wear a mask all the time, they'll tell you that after a couple of hours, having this elastic around your ears is just agony. So creative people, and this is mine because I'm always wearing a hat, but I'm going to show you some. You can use what's called a mask extender. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put those elastics in the tie of my hat. And that is really helping me now. So now I can, when I breathe in, you can see a little bit more of this sticking to my face, but there's much better here. It's much better here. It's not perfect, but it's much better. Okay. So can we look at the slides for a second? So the thing that's nice about, depending on what your situation is that you can make something like this, and maybe you could start thinking of what can we do here to make this a little bit more efficient, but you can also help your efficiency by these mask extenders where you have these buttons. You can make them with cloth. People have made them with just pieces of elastic and 2 buttons. People have made headbands with buttons. There's a million things out of there, and it's so creative. It's really fantastic. I've gotten a lot of questions about the singer's mask, and you can see that they're out there, the do-it-yourselfers with these different masks. And I do think it's my impression that these masks, which have the nose bridge and have these bridges so that things are farther away, are to look at their efficacy. And then, of course, because you have more of that, there's probably more of a potential for there to be some leakage. So we know with this particular mask, and with this particular mask, they're all just solid. But this particular mask, the singer's mask, actually with the 3 layers of cotton, there's one area where there's a window, so there's only 2 layers of cotton. And I do know that particular mask is, my impression is that it's going to be looked at in detail, and the tests for that are forthcoming. So that's kind of what we know about masks. I think that, creative, there's a lot, I've been sent a lot of masks, mask designs by singers that have been very good. That, I said, if you're in the 6 foot and you're 30, for 30 minutes and you have good ventilation, they're good, and it would be easier to sing. So, but, you know, what we're really needing now is for Jelena and her colleagues to test some of these and really see what we can do to make things easy for the singers, comfortable for the singers, and yet safe for the singers. So
Great. Well, let's have some Jelena come back in and let's just converse a little bit about the mask segment here. We talked about the different kinds, and we have some questions about what, you know, if we had a cloth mask and pantyhose, does that mean we could sing for longer in a rehearsal? Yes, no, that's one thing.
So
And
our recommendation was, because we cannot now yet give you precise measurements or results, and there is still too much diversity in masks, in fit, in ventilation systems, in type of the singing that you're doing. So we would like to recommend that 30-minute to stick to it, and definitely with a mask, and do not take mask off until you are outside and far, far away from anybody else.
great. You know, one thing we didn't talk about yet, Lucinda, as far as we've seen a number of clear masks as well. You know, with either cloth with some kind of cutout insert, or, you know, a larger space that's clear. Are we, and I don't know what kinds of testing have been done on those, if any, but Jelena, are we really we're really talking about fit here, right? I mean, if it fits well and it keeps the leakage to a minimum, then those should work.
Yes. And again, Lucinda, other colleagues, everybody will have much more to tell you in the weeks to come, because this is really developing, and we're trying to give our best advice so that people are safe in this moment, because time is kind of pacing really fast, and vaccine development historically used to be much slower process. This technology development for personal protection equipment was much more slower. I'm aware that there is a really big initiative at CDC for developing masks that are more comfortable, better fit, and so on. So things are kind of coalescing, and people are providing some more innovative solutions in this first round. I bet you that each of these masks or type of solutions will become lines of products as companies pick up on this technology. But right now we are in a no man's territory where people are just being inventive to save each other's lives. So a little bit being cautious. Go ahead, Lucinda.
well, you know, just one of the things, you know, people send me, like I said, masks all the time, and there are some companies with the clear masks that actually have a little HEPA filter in it. And you know, I said, that sounds great because it's supposed to be an N95 fit, but you have to make sure that, you know, what's the two-way air exchange there. You know, if you're going to be, for example, in a COVID situation, you know, if I'm walking into the operating room and somebody is, well, asymptomatic, and we have a false negative, how safe would I be with that mask? That's kind of the way I look at it. But yeah, I agree with you totally. The technology is coming, and right now the recommendations that you've made, I support 100%, because we need to, if everybody, and that's the other thing that makes it difficult, everybody's face is different. And like, I have one of my colleagues who, you know, is very tall, and he's just got a very oval, big head. And it's so, he's just having the worst time trying to get, you know, mask fit, a test for an N95 mask, because the shape of his face is just, it's just so big and kind of oval and long. So, I mean, if we all were the same size, it might be easier, but it's going to be very challenging to get everybody into something so that everybody can be safe. but I'm really pleased that everybody's working really hard for that.
I want to talk a little bit about risk assessment for 5 minutes, then we're going to loop back around and try to catch as many of these questions that have come in on the variety of topics that we've talked about. One of the things, and Tim and Marty and Catherine might want to come back on and join us as well. One of the things that we've discussed quite often in our conversations and in some of our previous webinars is the idea of risk assessment. And one of the things that I think is really important is that we all individually understand our own personal risk tolerance. Some of us are very risk averse, and some of us are thrill seekers, and we enjoy risk. And so in consultation with some of my psychologist colleagues, they suggested that we all test ourselves and understand where we fall on a scale. And this is one test that has been recommended, and it's a simple test of about 50 questions. They might want to pop that in the comments field on the YouTube channel. But it's about 50 questions. You do it online, and it spits out a scale for you on 0 to 100 and gives you a category and a little description. And so, and this obviously might vary from some, weeks to others on individuals, but it gives you a little description about what the strengths of that score are, what you might want to watch out as in that score. So this is just one example and one that's been recommended to us to use individually, first to understand, especially if we are in charge or leading groups or responsible for others who are singing. It's really important for us to have that perspective and understand where we fall on the scale. It gives you a 0 to 100 scale there, and then gives you that little description. So we encourage you to do that and understand where you fall, because that can help you understand how you might want to be careful about your further evaluation of decisions that you might make for rehearsals. And then, of course, we've all been talking about environmental risk assessment this whole webinar pretty much. But a couple of the tools that were recommended the other day on the webinar, and then one of the ones that I personally have been using just about every day is this Georgia Tech Event Risk Assessment tool. The unique aspect of this Georgia Tech risk assessment tool is that it's based on data over the last several weeks in your specific area. I can go to my county every day, and I can go to this tool on the map and go to my county. I can vary it by, I'm getting ready to go be in a group of 25 people. What's the percentage of risk in my county if I go to a meeting that has 25 people in it, or 50 people, or 100 people? And it will give you the percentage chance that somebody in that group might be positive. So this is a tool that you can use daily, weekly, because we know that this situation is dynamic and it's changing, and we are going to have to be responsible for groups and making these decisions, and knowing that a steep change to the negative might, of course, totally change our rehearsal schedule or our teaching schedule. The Colorado Boulder model is one we've mentioned before, about a risk assessment tool which allows you to put in square footages of rooms, various other aspects of your environment, air exchange rates and things like that if you know it, and also estimate what the likelihood, if one person is positive in your group of 50, what the likelihood of spread is in others within a 30-minute rehearsal or an hour-long rehearsal. Also, a newer resource to me, but one that was recommended last week, is this Harvard UC Boulder Portable Air Cleaner Calculator. And this helps you with some of the things that Jelena was talking about just a moment ago, about the ratings you might find on HEPA filters when you go to the store. This calculator allows you to put in square footage of the room, your studio space, your rehearsal space, and gives you the data that you might need to look for on some of these packages when you go shopping online or shopping in a store for those. And then also the ASHRAE website, which are all the standards and resources for heating and air and exchange rates and all those kinds of things. These are some really positive and quality resources that will help you and help us all as we try to keep a kind of a pulse on the changing environment around us. Many of us are going back to schools. We're starting semesters in varying formats, and all of these tools can help us create a picture for ourselves and our individual environment and how we want to lead our groups and our individual studios and our schools. So I think these are some things that hopefully we feel will be useful to you. They're all going to be on our various COVID sites, and they'll be associated with the YouTube video that will go up on this webinar as well, so you'll be able to find them very easily. So I want to bring everybody back in now, and we can look at a little bit some more of these questions and see what else is out there that we really want to address in our remaining time. I think we've had a couple of questions about teachers in public schools, even with the proper mask fit, which, you know, is varying sense of likelihood based on what parents might provide students. You know, I think there's no at least Jelena might want to reiterate this one more time, that it really is at the data that they have right now, no matter what you're using, what kind of mask, how many masks you're going to put on at one time, all of that, the recommendation is don't rehearse in the same space longer than 30 minutes. Correct?
Correct. And I did see some questions as related to, can we bring immediately next group? The answer is absolutely no. You have to give it roughly almost the same amount of time that you rehearsed until the next group of people comes in. So whoever had the idea of bringing the band or performers from one field or one side of the park to another to continue rehearsal, I think same thing applies to the rooms. You have to leave the room alone and go to a next one, or however whatever resources you have. But for 3 air changes, which is standard, really good ventilation, you have to give it at least 20 minutes until you bring the next group again. So please be mindful. We are trying to find curves here to do some practices and engagement in person. This is not the time to be testing your own ideas.
Yeah, someone mentioned the bandanas, and I think that's a material also that's been kind of seen as not very protective.
Correct. Bandanas have been already demonstrated to not be protective for.
Good. Tim, Marty, Catherine, what questions do you feel?
I'm wondering, I've seen a question about numbers of people a few times now, and I've said to myself, oh, it must just be simple math. Is that true, to try to figure out how many people you can have in a space, or is there more to it than that?
Depends what you call simple math, because it is really about the concentration and the amount of air that you're bringing in. So somehow, again, I like going back to the swimming pool because we all have experience with this. So if you have more kids in one same swimming pool or same rehearsal hall, you have to pump more water to keep it clean. Same with the air. If you have more kids, you have to pump more water. So this air, whatever. So this 6 feet recommendation kind of tags along on how much air you probably have. It's not just the spray-borne droplets. So the number of kids matter. So if you are well under the number of what you typically have, you can stretch a little bit at a time, but not too much. So the fewer the kids, the better.
Okay. Yeah, so it's not just multiply by 6 and be done. It's much more complicated.
No, because this morning, again, we were debating if we could empower you with some simple tools on measuring your own flow rates. You know, every morning I wake up with that, because if you are to go to any of this analysis on risk, for example, or this HEPA filter, you need to know what is your ventilation rate in the room. That's kind of a starting point. And I guess what you probably have, because we train designers and they have to have their licenses and they have to do a good job there, but we can never really be certain. So there are also some ideas on, again, I can explain, but I don't want to use this forum. I've been told so far, whatever I came out with was too sciencey.
Well, there are a couple of questions in the feed too about how do I get everybody to exit the room appropriately after rehearsal.
So that's why I think that 30-minute window between rehearsals accounts for this exiting orderly. So you would probably have to say first row, second row, third row, and kind of time them and pace them, give them a rhythm at which they are allowed to leave. So keeping the social distance, yes, orderly, one by one, just the way they are seated. That's, and again, I know that's not easy for teachers or kids, but somehow give them, I'm a teacher myself, so I always give them some pep talks, telling them that we will all be better off because their generation will be amazing as they have this really strict practice in self-control. And the consequences are really dire. So I encourage them to be leaders and to practice, because it's hard for adults, and I can only imagine how hard it is for kids.
Someone mentioned using kinesiology tape around, you know, a less fitting mask. Any ideas about that?
Can help.
I mean, I'm assuming they mean, you know, can I take a less fitting mask and take some kinesiology, you know, tape around the edges? Would that help? Is that?
I think it will, but I mean, Lucinda, please, but I don't think that it would make it comfortable.
Yeah.
Exactly. You know, that's the standard surgery trick. If it's not fitting, you know, we tape it. But you have to be very careful, because I don't really know what the glue is on the kinesiology tape, but many people have a tape allergy, and we butt up against this all the time in surgery. You know, that people have, they can only use paper tape because of this specific kind of adhesive on it. So some people cannot tolerate the plastic tape or all of these other different tapes. And I would be very concerned, because we have seen where people didn't know that, and we didn't know they had a tape allergy, that as we had things on their eyes, we take it off and, you know, there's raw skin there. It can be, so, and, you know, our nurses, sometimes when they're not getting a good mask fit, they'll put that on there, and you see them crying as they take that tape off at the third case, because, you know, having that ripped on and off your face several times a day can be very uncomfortable and very painful. Mm-hmm. So it sounds like a good idea, but it is fraught with some risk, and especially right around your eyes. You know, that's such a delicate, sensitive area. I'd be a little leery about doing that on a routine basis.
Yeah. We touched on the distance from distance of directors from choirs earlier, and somebody's asked that question again. Did we address it? I think we've addressed it as best we can given the data that we have.
Yeah, we did not study that particular situation. I did actually took a note here. Again, I would recommend as a first gut instinct to definitely be more than 6 feet separated in that situation, because we understand that facing each other is really not helpful. So we would recommend that directors step back more than what they would usually do. Again, I don't know what standard distance is. I have seen some performances, but the further away is actually better.
I think also an interesting perspective we haven't really talked about is, some people think they have longer classes, and if they rehearse for 30 minutes, then people can stay in there and talk for another 30 minutes. But what you're saying really is just any activity past that 30 minutes is going to make the situation worse. So you need to vacate that space and have alternate spaces available to you.
Exactly. Exactly.
I know my colleagues and I were having a meeting this morning, even talking about things like we do studio classes in our voice studios once a week, where we might, in a normal situation, have 5 or 6 singers sing one piece and move through a space. And of course, we realize we can't do that in the way we have been doing it, even if we were in 30 minutes, because we don't want that same singer, the next singer coming to that same spot on stage where the last singer sang. So one of the things that I know people have talked about are kind of developing maybe a triangle where perhaps the piano is here and you've got at least maybe 2 spaces, one that's way over here for a singer, one that's way over here for a singer, and at least you can maybe hear a couple of singers in 30 minutes in a situation like that. Comments about something like that?
Sorry, I personally did not quite understand the setup. So the spatial distribution is one thing. The other thing is where your air is being supplied. So if I am to give some quick advice, is that the cleanest air is closest, of course, where the air is being supplied. Am I right? But I also I advise that if you jam everybody in that area where air is coming in, if you have a case of asymptomatic COVID, then you actually promote the dispersion. So I tell people just forget about that. But spatial distribution is not just a floor plan, it's really how air flows to your space. And because there are so many setups and the source are the people. So what you want is to protect against this asymptomatic person standing anywhere in the room, because that's the best scenario case to think about rather than kind of hedging your bets. The only thing that I'm thinking can actually be useful in bringing down some of the downtime is really having this local HEPA filtration in the room. So maybe the thing, it can be a little bit noisy, the fans, right? And it can be annoying to run them through the rehearsals. If you have good ventilation, you don't have to do with these recommendations and masks, but maybe after 30 minutes, everybody gets out and you guys just run the HEPA filters and kind of reduce maybe that downtime when everybody vacates the space or gets out for a little walk and then comes back.
Tim, you got a big question that you see in the feed that hasn't been answered?
It's more of a question to Jelena about the behavior of the aerosols. Those of us in music have spent our life looking at the physics of sound, how it bounces off reflective objects. And I get the filter piece. What I'm wondering about is just the materials on walls, the materials. I've seen all these plexiglass and constructions, and the behavior of the aerosol itself. Is it like a sound wave, or I'm not thinking it would actually be absorbed by material, but does it behave as a reflection similar to sound waves? I mean, how does an aerosol behave when it hits different kinds of absorptive materials? And the reason I ask the question is these rooms that we're working in, the ideal rooms are fairly live rooms in terms of reflective materials that the walls and everything else is made of. Is there any comment you can make about just how the behavior is when it actually hits a surface?
So you gave me a very interesting question. I again took a note because I will look at material properties for those surfaces, because you are talking about soundproofing, kind of your okay, I'll think about that. I don't know about that particular material, but unfortunately, particles are not behaving like waves, and they have. It depends what the particle is. So, if, unfortunately, because we are talking about the breath, you are talking about both wet and solid components of the particle, and when expelled, most of the material is actually, encased in some part of the liquid, but as it floats, liquid can evaporate. So you can have a heavy droplets that are still wet, and they're so heavy that they drop on the floor. So that's spray-borne potential to kind of expel heavy particles directly towards you, and they can fall onto the floor and stick there. You have then particles in the medium size that are floating around and are still wet, and then they can come to the surface of the wall, and they can basically stick, and you're done there. But unfortunately, you have these tiny ones that are in a solid phase, and they basically evaporated all of the liquid because it was never too much liquid in there, and they can actually bounce or stick depending on your surface. So it's a little bit more complicated with particles than with the waves.
Would it be remotely safe to have a voice recital with one singer and a pianist being 20 feet away from one another in a large recital hall?
So volume helps. I liked, as soon as you told me 20 feet, only 2 people. I know that recital hall was designed to have some audience. So if I'm to answer Catherine's question about simple calculation, we might come with an idea on how many people typically spends in the space, or your space was designed for, and how risk comes down the fewer the people you have there. So we can assume that ventilation is working as usual, as if you had the audience, and we can kind of plucking people out and show you, but 2 people, I think it's great, but there could be some calculation if you typically have 20, but you reduce by half or quarter or so on. So as soon as you said 20 feet, 2 people, I know it's a large space. I know it has ventilation. That's a pretty good setup to have. Allen, you're muted. We cannot hear you.
I have a question just around just next steps. Jelena, when are you starting your testing of the same study that's been going on at the University of Colorado? And then secondly, were there other singers, this might be for Olivia, other singers that went through the testing as well? And then Olivia, when are you going back into the lab to do another round of tests? Because I think there's multiple phases from which you're engaged. So maybe some of those next steps, I don't know who wants to answer some of those things first.
I can answer pretty quickly as far as were there other singers. To my knowledge, it was only me. And I have not been contacted yet as to whether or not I will be coming back in the next couple of weeks. I would assume so at some point, but I don't know about that. So, yeah.
So for us, we already started outdoor tests because we found some peculiarities there and want to advise people what is too high of a wind for you to be practicing with your marching band outside. And also want to show mask efficacy in outdoor environment. We are in the phase where I would, so that's why I'm sitting here, and I really appreciate actually all of your questions. I will, if I could get a saved version of a chat, that would be really very helpful. I'm taking notes, but I'm also trying to answer your questions, so I cannot pick up everything. We would like to do something that is different than what Colorado does. Originally, we thought that we should replicate studies, so that that's a very solid scientific method, so that we get very certain about the outcomes, or as certain as possible. But I think because of the crisis that we are all collectively living through, I was going to propose to our sponsors to do complementary study and to follow the track of highest risk, meaning the events where we are kind of seeing the and being singing in this case, or some of the other more aerosol emitting instruments. Because if we follow the worst scenario case, then everything else that we do is only better. So we already started outdoor tests, but I do want to revise, I personally, from all of the conversations and your kindness in listening and reporting to us your biggest concern. I think our original plan, and it was created only a month and a half, is not good anymore. Because we can probably use our time even more effectively than what we originally planned. So stay tuned. I actually plan to retool the design of our study and follow the highest highest value targets in terms of the performances that create particles being singing, and also in terms of the mitigation, because we have to quickly get our hands around mitigation. These HEPA filters that we are talking about, is how to reduce the time between performances or basically teaching events. I think those are really highly important questions, and we can work in parallel rather than repeating events. So that's, Olivia, please don't take it personally. I know they did not call you because we are just marching to the next instrument, next question that we were asked. Ideally, you would be called back, but nothing is ideal these days.
I believe the Colorado study was going to have a soprano, alto, tenor, bass, and then also the actors were going to be asked to sing as well. And then we anticipate 2 children being evaluated and also a senior adult singer. So that was the intention in the initial planning phase for the Colorado study.
Yes, I have I now remember the 4 types of singers. I did not, that theater performances were added more recently. So again, just strapped for time, and needs are overwhelming. And most importantly, human life is on the line. So people really dread releasing anything from their labs, as you could imagine.
Tim?
Yeah, Alan, thank you. I want to mention that all of our organizations that are sponsoring this today have created COVID response pages. And so for Chorus America, Barbershop Harmony Society, NATS, the Medical Association, and American Choral Directors Association, I've seen a lot of comments in the chat room here, and it's really interesting, of course, that we all come at this based on the kind of choir we're working with. And I think if people will go to our various pages, that is what we've tried to do. We've really tried to respond to this, knowing that children's choirs are responding differently, perhaps, than church choirs that are different from the university choirs. So I just encourage people to go to our pages, look at how our members and our leaders have tried to reduce and focus as to the kind of choir experience as each one of these different choirs have to deal with different things. Because I was noticing myself, you and I took the risk assessment. You told me about it. I took it. My score is 11 points higher than yours. But at the end of the day, when I consider what my risk assessment is with a different group, it actually changes. I noticed that it's a different risk feeling depending on what kind of group I'm working with. And if I'm considering I'm coming back home to my family and I have a family member that has not had COVID. So I really believe this always comes down to an individual kind of assessment that we have to do. And that's what we've tried to do on our separate pages. So I just ask everyone, go a little deeper into these associations and look at their COVID response pages, because we've got a lot of information that we've tried to gather in those resource pages.
That's a great comment, Tim. And we do all have slightly different things, but I think we all have coordinated our efforts, and there is a lot of overlap as well between our 4 COVID pages. We've worked hard to kind of make sure that we're consistent in that aspect, to provide all of our organizations the best resources we can. Well, we are out of time, and this has been such a valuable experience, especially to talk to Olivia about her experience as someone who's been through the testing. Especially Jelena, thank you so much for your expertise and for your wonderful work, your sensitivity in explaining it. There were a couple of comments about thank you for being sciencey in the feed. So I think we're grateful for the expertise and the explanations that you've brought to us in the many places many of us have seen you speak during this crisis, and we're grateful for your work and your passion for this time for us. And Lucinda, of course, we always appreciate your expertise, your leadership in PAMA, and all the ways in which you guide us and take care of our singers all the time. So with that, I'm really grateful for this partnership we have, and for all the great work that all of you are doing out in the hinterlands and the communities. We ask you to follow all these protocols in the best way you can. We know that some people are put in difficult situations in the coming days and have already been put in difficult situations. And our thoughts are with you as you teach, as you sing. And we hope that this material that we've worked on so hard today and provided you, and the material that's coming in the future, will serve you as you serve others and as you serve our art form. And with that, well, thank you so much for being here. And we will have this recording processed and available for everyone on the YouTube site. And of course, then it will be posted on all the individual resources pages as well. So thank you again to everyone for joining us, and a good night.